Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with a news update I absolutely did not expect to be making so close to the launch of The Outer Worlds, but it does appear we are getting a brand new IP from Obsidian Entertainment. So let me catch you guys up. For those who aren't aware, tomorrow is the beginning of XO19, which is a big Microsoft fan-focused show that's really best compared to PlayStation experience. There will be naturally a lot of announcements, reveals, and more, a lot of which has leaked, so keep this in mind that if you don't want the show spoiled for you and would rather things be a surprise, then do consider tabbing off from today's video. But anyway, we have a leak over on Twitter from Daniel Ahmad, or ZugeEX, who we have used quite a bit in the past. He is a reputable source, a reliable one, so I do trust the information in these tweets, and then we'll be compiling some information on top of that as to what exactly Obsidian may be up to. So let's get to reading. XO19 is worth watching tomorrow if you're a fan of Xbox Game Studios. The event will have solid 2020 release dates for XGS games like Bleeding Edge, Minecraft Dungeons, and Wasteland 3, new IP from Obsidian and Rare, a shadow drop, plus much more. Microsoft has been investing heavily in its studios, games, and services. Even with next gen right around the corner, Xbox Game Studios have approximately half a dozen titles scheduled to ship in 2020, prior to the Scarlet launch. Game Pass will be a big focus, as always, both for Xbox Game Studios and 3P. Now, in the terms of the shadow drop, Daniel does clarify that he says one point I wasn't aware of is that the Shadow Drop game was already dated for November 14th. That game is Age of Empire 2 Definitive Edition. So a brand new IP. For those not familiar with the verbiage, a brand new intellectual property, which was what The Outer Worlds was, a start of a new franchise. Obsidian's doing another one of those, and it's apparently being announced tomorrow. Now, you may remember the wording from Daniel's first tweet where he said a new IP from Obsidian and Rare. There is a clarification made there as well. Someone does ask on Twitter, you mean one new IP each from Rare and Obsidian, or is it a co-production? To which Daniel says one each. So this is a Obsidian new IP already, which is mind-blowing. I thought they were going to turn The Outer Worlds into a series, but this very well may be a one-off. Now, we also want to look at some of the timeline here. Microsoft only acquired Obsidian a year ago. In fact, ironically, it was announced that they were acquiring Obsidian at XO18. So is it possible that in that amount of time they actually put something together? I think what we're seeing here is Microsoft trying to form a timeline, in a sense, to give purchasers confidence in the future of Xbox with the hit that is The Outer Worlds. While it's fresh in everyone's mind, you announce this brand new IP and say, hey, we got something going on with the developers of that game and it's going to be AAA. But is it possible that Obsidian Entertainment maybe put something together that was much smaller, an indie-like game or an isometric RPG more than likely, that wouldn't take as long to develop? Well, I don't think it's going to be something isometric because of a recent post from Josh Sawyer, who has worked at Obsidian for quite a long while, and he actually helped direct the Pillars of Eternity franchise. He was asked recently on his personal Tumblr account if there would be a Pillars 3 game, and his answer really does speak a lot to the future of Obsidian. He says, that's not really something that I get to decide, but I do think that the relatively low sales of Deadfire, which was the sequel to Pillars of Eternity 1, mean that if we consider making another Pillars game in this style, we're going to have to re-examine the entire format of the game. It is difficult to know exactly why a sequel sells worse than its predecessor if both games review relatively well. Is it just because the first game satisfied the existing need and the audience just wasn't interested in the second? Is it because awareness was lower for the sequel? Is it because despite the strong reviews and the strong sales for the first game, people didn't really like it? Maybe it's a combination of all these things. I love his transparency here, by the way. The problem is that without really understanding the reasons, it's hard to know how to move forward. It would be easier in some ways if Deadfire were also a colossal critical failure, and we could point to the massive screw-ups that we needed to address. Players did criticize the low difficulty at launch in the main plot, which I think are fair and reasonable, but those problems alone don't really explain the difference in sales. And while player reviews were weaker for Deadfire than Pillars 1, professional criticism tended to say that Deadfire was an improvement over the first game in most areas. Now, he does have more on his personal Tumblr account in the terms of a response, but I thought this little blurb here was really important to highlight because it shows that not only is it not up to him, but more importantly, from his perspective, Obsidian can't correctly identify if it's the genre an isometric RPG. Is it something wrong with the Pillars franchise? Do they start a new IP because they also did Tyranny, which didn't really set the world on fire, pardon the pun. Where I don't think it's very plausible that Obsidian's going to dive into isometric RPGs so quickly, especially after the Outer Worlds. I think that was Obsidian's goal all along, was to get the funding to properly make a game akin to Fallout New Vegas. I think that's where a lot of their strengths really lie. We can see that the writing was still there, the storytelling was still there, the gameplay was best compared to Fallout 4, which isn't great, but isn't necessarily bad. Still, I don't think that what we're going to see tomorrow at XO19 will be a isometric game. I don't think it'll be something that's ready within the next year. I think it's going to be something in the terms of a timeline for Xbox, something to give Xbox fans something to look forward to. But this also brings me to a very major point, which is what of the future of the Outer Worlds? Now, we do know Obsidian's grown quite a bit. I believe they have 200 plus employees currently at their studio, which is quite sizable. They can balance multiple projects with a staff like that. Does this mean, though, if Obsidian's announcing a new IP tomorrow, are they bringing DLC at all to the Outer Worlds? What are the modding requests? They said they were interested in trying to get something like that done. Post-launch support is so important for the Outer Worlds, and I just feel like the best platform to announce all of that is A, when it's fresh in people's minds, which is just a couple of weeks after launch on a big stage like XO19, because one big mistake that a lot of companies make is waiting too long to announce their DLC, way after the fact where people don't really even care about it except for the very hardcore fans. You want to capitalize on all those people who are already tapped into your game, tapping into Game Pass. That type of stuff is so important. And I think both modding and DLC are key to the future of the Outer Worlds. This game can have the legs of a Bethesda game studio game. The framework is there, the fan base is certainly there and understands these types of games, so I think Obsidian needs to pursue that type of path. That doesn't mean that if we don't hear about DLC for the Outer Worlds tomorrow, that it's not coming at all. I just find it very surprising. However, we also have to consider the most recent patch that came out from Obsidian Entertainment. It did consist of some very important fixes that hit the game, such as text size being way too small and glitches that would prevent you from even finishing the game. There were major bugs that were fixed, but that took them a couple of weeks to get together. So it is possible that Obsidian doesn't even have a game plan for DLC because they weren't prepared for this amount of love for the franchise and the amount of people who were excited for more from this game. I mean, in a perfect world, I looked at it and said, okay, Obsidian releases this game at the end of October, and maybe towards the middle or end of December, we have brand new DLC for the Outer Worlds, whether it's something big or small. I think a big expansion would happen sometime next year for the Outer Worlds, but I think when it comes to DLC, it would be smaller, new pieces of loot that you could acquire, new quests, just tiny things to fill out the already established product, which is the Outer Worlds. I don't know how many planets they could go to. Obviously, I have a whole video dedicated to ideas for DLC for Obsidian. I did research trademarks to see if Obsidian had posted anything about that, because when Pillars of Eternity was trademarked, that was out there for Obsidian. When the Outer Worlds was trademarked, it was right out there as well. It seems like Obsidian may have learned from their, we'll say, errors of the past and have not put up any new trademarks. So this one could be literally anything, right? When we saw the Outer Worlds, we were able to deduce like, okay, this is going to be a sci-fi game, but we have really nothing to work off of. I think it'd be interesting if we saw a fantasy style game from Obsidian that was shaped in the same mold of the Outer Worlds, that same style of game, you know, hub to hub kind of locations. I think that would be really neat, and I'd love to see Obsidian take something like that on. Although with a fantasy setting, you need good melee combat, which the Outer Worlds really lacked. But it's just confusing, right? I thought when a leak would come out for XO19, it would not be that Obsidian's announcing a new game. I mean, part of it's also strange because don't you want the Outer Worlds to breathe? I mean, why are we so quick to move on to the next thing? It's really strange. I mean, it's not like a Bethesda game studio scenario where when they had the Fallout 76 situation, they were announcing it something different, that they also announced Starfield, The Elder Scrolls 6, to let people know of a timeline of, hey, we're doing something different, but look, we have these coming in the future that are very much what you're used to from us, although 76 is something completely separate from our usual product. And maybe for Obsidian, it's vice versa. They just did a very awesome single-player RPG, and they might try something multiplayer related, and so they might say, hey, while things are hot for us and people are really enjoying what we're doing, let's announce a multiplayer game. But oh my god, that just sounds so weird to say, and I really don't think it's possible. But I'm just brainstorming at this point in time because this news piece really threw me off. I can't even imagine what the new IP would be. So that's just some brainstorming. That's the information. That's the discussion on what's happened with Obsidian. I was originally going to take today off. But Obsidian was not allowing that. So anyway, I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments down below. What do you think of the latest information about Obsidian Entertainment? Fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.